Hello. This is my second attempt to try to describe the culture framework. The first video I made was supposed to be a draft, and the initial intention was to do many such takes and allow it to be a little bit more fluid. But I think that first video really transparently demonstrated the place at which the culture framework manifested in my mind and in my heart. So I just decided to leave it, and it's absolutely transparent, and I hope that it can at least show the intention of cultures in some way, and I'll attempt to do that more here. But instead of describing the technical aspect of cultures, I think it might be a good time now to make the case for cultures through an evolutionary and historical lens, and try to figure out what the root causes are for many of today's issues. Not discuss anyone in particular, but just try to find the root of these things. And I think that is very important to discover as we attempt to build the civilizational operating systems of the future. We must address the changing civilizational environment and address the things that have worked in the past and have not worked in the past, and that now need to evolve as our environment evolves. So in this video, I have four primary bodies of thought that make the case for cultures. So the first one I'd like to discuss is called value vectors. And a value vector is essentially just a deep sense in one's self, in one's soul, of what they find important and what they are incentivized by. And this really guides one's actions in their life. And humanity's default value vector is resource growth. This is not some coincidence. This is evolutionary embedded in humanity, as those that valued resource growth tended to have a higher probability of survival, as they would survive through periods of scarcity and through periods of conflict. And this was quite important for humanity as we expanded as well. So as we expanded geographically, more resources were needed to fuel this expansion. As we expanded demographically, as the quantity of humans on planet Earth increased, we needed more resources to fuel this growth as well. And what's changed now is that our expansion along the demographic and geographical vectors are plateauing, and demographically, at least, we will be decreasing. The birth rate is trending below replacement, so we will collectively as a human species plateau, and then we'll be decreasing in our global population. And we have simultaneously entered into this era of abundance. So while valuing resource growth was so critical for humanity to enter this era of abundance and to be able to bring us to this point, continuing to value resource growth as our primary value vector is increasingly harmful to humans and our environment. And a couple of quick examples here just to bring this a little bit into reality. If you take the healthcare sector, when you ask yourself what is incentivized in the healthcare sector, is it absolute health in the limit? And what is absolute health in the limit look like? And one could likely argue that absolute health in the limit looks like a civilization, a society that does not need pharmaceutical drugs. It does not need medical scanning equipment. It does not need doctor's offices everywhere, because the population is already is healthy from preemptive healthcare and from healthy lifestyles. This, of course, is unattainable, but in the limit, this is what health would look like. And we should ask ourselves, is our current resource growth value vector in the healthcare sector, is this what is being incentivized? Arguably no, right? Like pharmaceutical companies are incentivized to maximize the amount of atoms they sell, the amount of prescription drugs they sell, and medical equipment manufacturers are incentivized to maximize the amount of atoms they sell, maximize the amount of units of equipment they sell. And medical offices are incentivized to maximize the amount of seconds that they are spending with patients to try to diagnose their ailments. And if we reached some form of absolute health, or even anything close to it, our current healthcare system, our current healthcare sector in our current resource growth value vector would collapse. So it would stand to reason that absolute health is not what is being incentivized here. Similarly, in media, we must ask ourselves, what is media, and what is the ideal situation? What does absolute perfect dissemination of information look like? And again, one could argue that would be the efficient transfer of information from a high concentration to a low concentration, and that information could simply be placed on a leaf on the branch of information tree in one's mind, and then efficiently move on to the next piece of information to add that leaf to your information tree in your mind. And is that what's incentivized in our current media sector within our resource growth value vector? Unequivocally no. Our resource growth value vector is incentivizing engagement and maximization of seconds of engagement and clicks on their articles. And if they get fewer clicks and fewer responses from their clients, from their customers, then that will be looked upon negatively from a media standpoint in our resource growth value vector. And one last example, in household consumables, say in some appliance, is the appliance manufacturer, what is their incentive structure for them? Well, they would prefer to sell as many atoms as possible. And how do you do that? You reduce the life cycle of your products, so that if you make something that lasts half as long, you sell twice as many products. And this, of course, comes at the sacrifice to the consumer, who has to buy twice as many goods now, and the environment, which has to absorb twice as much waste. And of course, you have the twice as much energy to build twice as many products, and twice as much transport-related energy and emissions. And in all three of these examples, it's not that the individuals within these sectors are being malicious. They are simply playing their role to try to do as good as they possibly can within the civilizational operating system that values resource growth as our primary value vector. The don't hate the player, hate the game thing is kind of relevant here, because again, these are generally well-intentioned individuals just trying to do well for themselves and their family and their community. But we have to zoom out here and just see what is the incentive structure. Why is this being incentivized, and why are we valuing the cranking everything up to maximum? And again, when you zoom all the way out, that's because we are just falling on our default value vector of resource growth. And as we enter this era of abundance, as we plateau in growth demographically and growth geographically, then this just relying on resource growth as our primary value vector is increasingly unstable and increasingly harmful, actually, to humanity and our environment. And one other aspect to look at here, or think about when you zoom all the way out in time and space, is that we really had no choice. In the pre-digital era, the only realistic metric that could be measured at a point of transaction was units, was quantity of resources. So naturally that's all that could be incentivized, was maximization of these quantity of units. Like 1 bale of hay would be 1x currency and 2 bales of hay would be 2x currency. There was no higher level coordination, societal level equation going on here on the effects on the society. And back in previous eras, there really wasn't any higher level societal effects on the small amount of transactions that were bespoke and segregated around the world. But today, in our large global economy with just the mass output of goods and services and so many transactions taking place, what is the incentivized action here? We have the opportunity, now that we've entered this digital era, to set new value vectors that are not specifically incentivized just to maximize the quantity of resources that are sold or the quantity of seconds of attention that are captured. And this is something that was never previously achievable. And this is a very difficult a question to answer, because how do you measure a pharmaceutical drug that is not, like a prescription drug that is not issued, that is not consumed because that patient was already healthy and didn't require it? How do you measure and value a news article that was so efficient and so effective at its job that like disseminating into the minds of individuals, that it did not garner some emotional response that require and a bunch of additional time spent thinking and looking at this piece of information? It was just absorbed, added to one's information tree in their mind, and they were able to move on. That's how do you value that? Because it's hard to quantify. And how do you value and quantify and measure a appliance that is not sold because the previous appliance is lasting twice as long? These are all extremely difficult questions to answer, but this is critical for humanity to be able to explore and seek new value vectors here that are not just based on resource growth, quantity of resources along this primary inherited evolutionary value vector. And what cultures do to try to spark some form of exploration in this aspect is such that cultures just emit a single token per second. And this token is not based on the output of the unit output in terms of just pure quantity is not just the metric that is valued here, that is counted. With far more data and with far more multivariable nonlinear equations, we can try to find new value vectors to pursue. And by emitting 1 token per second that is not tied to any one metric, this allows a culture to distribute this token in ways that they find valuable in output and growth along value vectors that are not resource growth and maximization of atoms and seconds of attention captured, but other metrics that may be very difficult to measure. But with this abundance of digital information, this is the tool that all previous civilizations did not have. And now we do, so we must pursue these new value vectors to allow humanity a chance to reach some sort of escape velocity from our default value vector. And this is not just a qualitative analysis. This is also, you can see this quite clearly quantitatively. Our global economy that is that is inherently, again, reliant on this resource growth value vector is just look at the balance sheet of this thing. It is no longer healthy. When you spend more than you earn in your respective value vector, and this is not just some small portion of one small organization of the world, but most all country organizations globally are all facing the same problem of they're spending far more than they earn. And this is just the increasing inability for the inherited resource growth value vector to be sufficient and appropriate for this time of abundance, and as we increasingly find some sort of steady state on geographic expansion and demographic expansion. And what's more is that when you have this value vector that's embedded in us that is no longer relevant, and the systems are just naturally eroding because the type of characteristics of leadership change, because when the system is functioning poorly, the only way that one can get elected in such a poor functioning machine is if the leadership is willing to mask or to be somehow for leadership to be somehow disingenuous in their messaging. Because if any honest person that was looking at this information clearly would explain it like it is that the whole this value vector, this organizational operating system is no longer appropriate for our time, for our civilizational environment is changing at an accelerating rate, and so too must our civilizational operating system. And this is such a root problem here. So this naturally pushes the types of characteristics of leadership to ones that are not ideal and not like that true leaders do not emerge here. And this is a very deep-rooted problem, but it's all comes back to our inherited, our evolutionary value vector of resource growth. And the same thing can be said for this leadership. It's not the leadership's fault. It's just the characteristics of the leadership are the ones that is the types of characteristics that are successful in a who are trying to lead an organizational operating system that is following a resource growth value vector that is no longer appropriate and increasingly harmful to humanity and our environment. And what cryptocurrencies have done is quite amazing. They've, in the sense that they have expressed humanity's willingness to pursue a new value vector. And in cryptocurrency's case, their token distribution, just like any other culture would show, you can transparently infer that cryptocurrency's value vector is distributed compute operators, distributed server operators. And you don't have to ask the leadership of these things what they value. You can just transparently see it in their token distribution. And 100% of their tokens are distributed to their distributed server architectures. Wonderful. This is one such instance of a new value vector, but is not the only. It's not the only new value vector that we should pursue. If one is to centralize the compute such that the efficiency is orders of magnitude more efficient, then that token, the token that is generated, can therefore bypass the servers and go toward incentivizing other behaviors or actions that are aligned with a value vector of a different culture. And no one individual, no one person or group of people know what the appropriate value vector is, nor should they be responsible for this. It is the responsibility of humanity as a whole to collectively try and iterate upon many value vectors. And the cultures can enable this by again, through their transparency and their ability to, for like the autonomy of these cultures to try various token distribution algorithms and leadership styles and the types of rules or lack of rules that they enact. And if they are effective in the beginning and then wane in time, the culture can simply be forked by individuals within that culture or from outside the culture and take it in a new direction or reinvigorate that culture. And this is all about just trying to maximize our iteration rate here, to try to find, to seek and pursue new value vectors for humanity. So I hope that all made sense. This value vector thing is quite fundamental to humanity's. It's a very deep-rooted, the deep-rooted cause of so many trickle-down effects that take the shape and form of other issues in civilization. But at the very root of this thing is just our evolutionarily inherited value vector of resource growth. The second case for cultures is something I call conscious evolution. And this can be a little esoteric, but I think the best way to describe this would be to talk about how the internet has allowed the input of information to the minds of the humans around planet Earth to be a flood of information, to open the gates to this flood of information. No longer do you have to be in a university library or some person of extreme wealth or power to have access to the world's information. You now have this all at your fingertips for almost zero marginal cost. And what this has done is my analogy is it's created a ocean of creators, and not just in the sense of like a YouTube video creator, but like builders and developers and makers and the new system architecture designers. And it's opened up the ability for humanity to just turn on the mechanisms and spark new ideas within one's brain. You just have so much more potentially useful stimuli coming in, information coming into your brain. But what's missing is that right now we just is the output from this ocean of potential. Right now we have this very small straw that typically results in some YouTube video or some tweet, or even if it's a business, the business is constrained by the typical framework of the corporate structure, that you can't leverage this global brain and this global potential, of this ocean of global potential. And what we really must do is build the machine that builds the machine. And it seems unlikely that the organizations of our past that were developed, designed, and trialed and have now been operating for centuries, well before the internet was even a figment of anyone's imagination, it seems unlikely that this new organizational structure that can leverage this potential will come from those incumbent organizational structures. And what cultures attempt to do here is create some sort of framework such that that we could have the potential and can begin seeking and building the machine that builds the machine. And what is required is, like in a YouTube video, for example, the incentive structure is the incentive structure is just for attention capture, but could you imagine if the incentive structure was for something productive, and like these brilliant creators and makers and engineers and manufacturers and people of all kinds, all ages, all education levels, all geographies around the world, does not matter. The potential is so high. If you could meaningfully incentivize these people to pursue value vectors and outcomes that are aligned with your culture, and you could meaningfully coordinate these people and meaningfully actually build something here such that one idea sparks many other ideas. This is all recorded and incentivized and acted upon in some meaningful way, that the potential is just hard to describe. I fail to come up with a word to describe how this could, like, the potential effects on humanity, and how great this could be for humanity's ability to make progress, and for us to diverge from the default resource growth value vector, which again, in like a YouTube sense or any social media sense, is all about how do you maximize engagement and attention that's the incentivized action. So you have all of these very well-intentioned people that are performing actions that have a negative effect for humanity on net, whereas we'd like to create a positive outcome for humanity. And by allowing cultures to create their own nucleus, their own way of doing this provides the potential for just to create these new vehicles of progress. And in the literal sense, conscious evolution is similar to unconscious evolution, where the child inherits the full genetic sequence from their parents in a genome freely, and then there's some potential for that genome to be mutated in some way such that the characteristics of the child may or may not be more advantageous and efficient and effective in their environment. This is evolution, and if you can take that process, which is quite slow, it's literally a lifetime to determine whether or not the change, the adaptation, the mutation is beneficial. If you can take that into the conscious realm and bring it into the human mind so that it can iterate as quickly as you can think, and if you can freely adopt all of the information from your parent, which in this case would be other cultures or other projects, then there's a potential for just a conscious evolution process, not just within one individual, but within a global brain. And again, the potential here is hard to fathom, but we must build this machine that builds the machine. And whether or not it's a culture or something similar to this is the point at where we're at right now. We need to expand this small straw of output from this global brain into a vast, wide, high flow rate delta. This is very exciting. The third case for cultures is not so much about the potential upside, but protecting against the downside. And this is, we must protect, as we increasingly interweave with digital information, we must build power and oversight and control, capture immunity. If we can continue to use the incumbent organizational structures of our past, again, these were developed long before the internet was ever envisioned, and therefore there's no self-check on the power that the leadership now has in their fingertips to monitor the actions and behaviors of their organization, like of the individuals within their organization. This can be anything from positioning data to what you eat and who you talk to and how you write and where you travel. All this information is increasingly available to the leadership, and if not kept in check, leadership has the opportunity to use this information potentially maliciously, such that they have, if they see any sort of behavior that is not aligned with their vision, then they can reduce your autonomy in some manner, or punish you in some manner, such that you are once again aligned with their vision. And this is, I suspect this is not a future that most of humanity wants, and you can see it creeping in slowly into Western civilization. But one does not have to look far to look at other organizational structures around the world with far greater populations to see the potential. And this is just still the beginning, but of where this can lead when you have leadership that has full control capture and oversight capture, with no self check option here. This can be very dangerous. So the two primary characteristics that it would appear that would be needed to keep this under control or to provide immunity is absolute transparency and the ability for individuals within the organization to opt out. These two characteristics can keep leadership in check to make sure they don't overstep their bounds. And if they do overstep their bounds, it will be transparent, and individuals can simply leave that culture and go along this substrate with their ideas and their time and their resources to other alternative cultures. Or they can simply just take everything from that culture, fork it, and start their own culture and lead it in a way that they feel is right. So this is a way to protect against the downside. And while it doesn't seem maybe too important yet, as we increasingly interweave with digital information, this will be very important. The fourth and last case for cultures is just maintaining purpose in abundant Earth. When you think about humanity's history, we started as hunter and gatherers and foragers, and slowly into small farming communities in the agricultural revolution. And during all these times, and when you're in a small groups of people, your actions every day had a material effect on the livelihood of the rest of the people in your tribe or your family. And if you did not perform your actions effectively, then it would have a negative effect on your family and your tribe or your community. And this really provided purpose for individuals. Like when everyone's actions are working towards the pillars of survival here to maintain existence, whether that's food, whether as a farmer to generate food, or as a warrior to protect, or as a mother, or as someone that if it depends on the era, like some working on tools and energy, or entertainment. These things are all required for a healthy, well-functioning society. And when you wake up in the morning and you know that your actions materially affect the livelihood and the probability of success of your tribe and your family, then that really gives you a lot of purpose. But as we increase our technology level and increasingly enter this era of digital abundance and technology abundance, such that an individual's actions are no longer required for the well-being of their family or their community, then it would stand to reason that one's purpose could be slowly lost here. And when you have when a purpose in one's life is slowly diminishing, the probability that the organizational behavior remains it decreases. When the purpose is slowly eroding, so too does the organizational behavior. And when you have this complacency and knowing that your actions no longer are required, or the well-being of your community is not dependent on your actions every day, this complacency can set in. And this complacency that's persistent through time can lead to this erosion of good organizational behavior, which of course will then lead to the erosion and the increased volatility of civilization. And And so we must think about this. How do we create these organizational operating systems, these civilizational operating systems, such that we can retain and maintain purpose in this world of abundance? And potentially what cultures can do is provide some collection of people that have aligned value vectors within your culture, and you can work towards growth along your value vectors. That potentially this can provide, maintain and provide purpose in your life, and this will be increasingly important, I believe, as we continue to rely on technology instead of your daily actions for the well-being of yourself and your community. And just to wrap up here, this is more of a generalized discussion. All four of these points are just a generalized. I'd like to initialize and to spark some generalized discussion about to think about these things as we move forward. Not necessarily just pitching this culture idea, but this is just one idea from one person. But whatever it is that we move toward, that we build collectively, we need to think intentionally about not just like these four things for sure, but many other aspects of what kind of future do we want to build together, and if given the option, now that we are entering into this fully new civilizational environment, if given the choice, how do we want this to be built such that we're proud to leave it for our children and maximize the resilience and the sustainability of the light of consciousness and humanity as a whole, and maximize the probability that people have the opportunity to thrive and to have autonomy and to have some sort of fulfilling purpose in their life. And this is the overarching thing I was trying to catalyze in this video, in this conversation, is not so much just how cultures can solve this, but how we just must think about these things more broadly. And hopefully, as we have more of these conversations about the deep-rooted nature of our problems and the potential of what is ahead of us, that we can really build a future that we want.